Now, the cardiovascular system, we've got the vasculature. Vasculature isn't necessarily our lungs. The vasculature refers to the veins and the arteries. Another part of what makes the cardiovascular system, you hear it sometimes called the cardiorespiratory system. You also hear the aerobic system. These words are all very interchanged, but when it comes down to true physiology, they are very separate systems. Cardiovascular has to do with the heart and the vasculature that carries the blood. The respiratory system refers to our lungs and the gas exchange involved in inhalation and exhalation. Now, the lungs stem off of our air passageways. We have our nasal passage and our mouth passage. And air enters the body through our mouth or our nose, comes down through different parts depending on how it entered the mouth, eventually ends up in the trachea, into the bronchioles, and into the left and the right lung. Another important part of our lung is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is what enables the lungs to expand, to absorb that oxygen as they soak it up through the breath, and press back up to help push the air out through exhalation. So just to recap, the functions of the respiratory system are inhalation and exhalation. We all knew that. Also, transferring oxygen to the circulatory system. The circulatory system is our heart, is our vasculature, is the same thing as the cardiovascular system. And through the inhalation and exhalation, we rid the body of carbon dioxide, which we'll learn in more detail is a byproduct of energy production as well as other physiological byproducts. I'll throw out lactic acid right now because all of us have heard lactic acid in some of our workout life. The respiratory system is divided into two parts, the upper and the lower tract. Pretty much anything outside of the chest cavity here, so more up here, is considered your upper respiratory system. What you need to take into account is there is the trachea, there is an upper and a lower trachea. So pretty much the dividing line is in the middle of the trachea. So the trachea is part of both, but the bronchioles and the lungs, the diaphragm, the pleural cavity, all of that is part of the lower respiratory tract. A lot of us are familiar with those terms when we've heard of respiratory tract infections. But in terms of how our body works, this is where the blood exchange happens, and the upper part allows for that air to move itself through and out of our body. All right, a little bit more about the respiratory system. We know about the nose and the mouth, the trachea, the bronchioles. The bronchioles are two splits that feed into our two lungs. Now, we talked about the capillary beds, how they are where the gas exchange happens in the muscle tissue. Well, in the lungs, where exchanges happen are called the alveoli. And that is where oxygen and carbon dioxide, in addition to biological waste, bio and physiological waste, are exchanged to be expressed. So that is at the alveoli level. Your bronchioles break off and form kind of a raspberry-looking thing like an alveoli. All of those bumps increase the surface area, if you remember from geometry a long time ago. By having kind of a bump-like shape, that allows for a greater surface area in which to have the gas exchange take place. All right, little bit about inhalation and exhalation, which we all know are a major part of exercise and a very noticeable part of intensity level in someone's effort, because we can kind of tell how hard someone's working based on how hard they're breathing or not breathing. Not that they're not breathing. So inhalation and exhalation, they are for the most part involuntary responses. Our body innately has to breathe because our body does that in our sleep. We do it without thinking about it. We can we can control it, but there's a point to which we can no longer control it. So that is what makes it classified as an involuntary response. Inhalation, what happens during this process, there's nerve impulses to the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. The intercostal muscles are the muscles in between each rib that connect one rib to the next. So there's nerve impulses that tell those muscles that they need to contract, and when something contracts, you think of it tightening. Well, in this case, the contraction is allowing the ribs to spread so that the lungs will have a little bit more room. The diaphragm is able to lower down from our rib cage. It's typically pressing up into our stomach. It moves down. Our organs that are there tend to push out. And the most efficient breath that we can breathe as an athlete is in a deep abdominal breath. But a lot of people are a little too proud, and so they'll stuck in their abs. And you don't get as full of a breath because you're not making room in your body for your lungs to expand to their full potential. So this expansion, the diaphragm moves down. This is for inhalation. So think the diaphragm is moving down, making more room for the lungs to expand. Air comes in, fills up the lungs, does its switcheroo with the blood from the heart, and then there's a change in pressure. So because of this expansion, there is a change in pressure, and the lungs expand, fill with air. The pressure outside of the lungs and inside the lungs begins to equalize. That is when the point is complete. Then there's another impulse causing the muscles to relax, which causes a change in pressure again. The lungs contract, muscles, diaphragm goes back up, helps to push that air out of our mouths and nose. Another picture that's also in your book involving the diaphragm, a little bit better angle than the anatomical sketch, but you can see the lowering to make room for the expansion of the lungs and the exhalation where the diaphragm relaxes back up, pushing the lungs back up, causing a change in pressure so the air goes out the mouth. Now, as personal trainers, something that's very important to note is we call it the Valsalva Maneuver. I call it holding your breath. And it's something that we all do when something's hard. I don't know, I can't explain why we do it, but you're trying to do a sit-up and and it's almost like you're thinking so hard about trying to get up, you forget to breathe. That's not really what happens, but pay attention to the next time you try and do a tough exercise. In Pilates, we use our breath to make a movement happen. You use the exhalation to help get your body to sit up, especially in a roll up or roll down. That air is very important in how you use it because then your muscles aren't trying to hold a contraction. They're able to help out in the movement that you're doing. The Valsalva Maneuver, most importantly, has to do with the change in blood pressure. A normal, healthy person can handle this, but it's a good habit to get into because as we age, as our health changes, our bodies change, so does our hypertensive levels. And when someone is hypertensive, has an chronically elevated blood pressure, holding their breath causes an increase in that blood pressure. And when that happens, there's difficulty in getting air to the brain, to the heart. They've cut off the body's air supply. Of someone that's not healthy, they need it. They count on that constant flow of air to maintain normal physiological function. So Valsalva Maneuver. Remember that, know what it is.